right, this is my favorite part of my day is when I get to turn on the microphone and talk with fantastic people. And I have a fantastic person to share some time with today, and I'm glad that I can share not just with me, but with the whole audience here. So thank you for joining, Ari. We're going to talk a lot about what's really nifty that's going on around edge AI, and specifically, what Akamai is both doing and seeing in the industry. We've got so many things that go on right now that are getting hyped and they seem noisy. And I thought this is a great chance for us to kind of say, hey, what's really going on, and what are some of the drivers to why AI at the edge is such an important story, and especially now. So for folks that are brand new to you, Ari, if you don't mind introducing yourself, and as the old office space says, tell us exactly what you do here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you in the audience. My name's Ari Weil. As you said, I work at Akamai Technologies. I run our product marketing, developer advocacy, and our competitive functions. So my job is super interesting, and I love the fact that I get to go out into the world, talk to customers, talk to prospects, understand what they're investing in as it pertains to growing their businesses, experimenting with AI, trying to make AI profitable for them in these sort of early days of a shifting from a human oriented technology ecosystem to human assisted, and then through to what we believe at Akamai is going to become a truly agentic internet. And what does that mean? How does that enable new business processes? How does that challenge your existing ways of thinking? How do you adapt to all of the things that AI is throwing at us right now? It's something, if you listen to any of the podcasts of the thought leaders out there, becoming a bit trite, but this is the slowest things will ever go again. These are the worst models will ever perform again. This is the least sophisticated agents will ever be again. And dear God, don't let OpenClaw loose with your credit card and your social media logins, because you'll regret it. So that's sort of what we deal with on a daily basis. But I'm really looking forward to getting into the conversation with you.
Yeah, this is great. And it's funny that I love the way that you brought that up, that we're in the announcement business in anything, right? And unfortunately what's happened is we went from like breaking news was a thing, and now just we have breaking news every 1.7 seconds. So you don't even believe what breaking news is, and wild trends can occur and then also disappear as fast as they arrive. So there's so many things that are moving and shaking, but it is that idea that everything up till now will be better from now on. And it's such a beautiful way to look at that. There's so much possibility with what we've done and leveraging it to go forward. And it is hard to say that we won't go back. There really is no unwinding of this thing. The kite is out, and that's it. We're just gonna get more string.
It's true. I mean, look, you may hear in tech circles a lot of people compare anything that they do to Apple and Amazon and some of the other, very large successful tech businesses out there. But there's that concept of one-way and two-way doors. And I feel like at this point, AI has very much been a one-way door. There's no going back through it. We are now fully in the age approaching abundance in a bunch of different ways. If you listen to thought leaders like Peter Diamandis, they talk about this all the time, and he's got a fantastic podcast of really a bleeding edge of what's happening with AI and robotics and the way that we need to be thinking about power and energy and even currency moving forward. But the thing that I think is tangible for most people right now is when you think about AI, it's kind of hard to put your finger on exactly what you're talking about. I mean, I have kids that have grown up with social media on phones, gaming. Even when we watched the Super Bowl, they didn't watch the Super Bowl on a television. They watched it between their phones and on their computers, their gaming computers, as it happens. And it's a little window, but then they've got their chats open. My one son is starting to experiment with investment via Greenlight, so he's there, kind of watching what's going on with different betting and the financial side of real time, watching sports. There's watching parties, and then in the meantime, they're gaming while the whole thing's happening. But you think about even something as simple as getting together like once a year in the United States and watching something like the Super Bowl, or if you're in Europe, maybe it's the UEFA Cup or FIFA or what have you, or it's cricket matches out in Asia Pacific. but we're not doing one thing at a time anymore. And it feels like a really interesting thing that when the automation, when the agents, when the software that we rely on a daily basis to make our lives better feel like they're letting us down, increasingly that's a lower bar all the time for what we consider is letting us down. I get frustrated when I try to talk to Siri on my iPhone and she doesn't understand me. I'm like, how could you not understand me? I'm speaking clearly, I'm enunciating. I asked you for something simple like next song when I'm working out and I don't want to go and push the button on my phone. How ludicrous is it that I'm not willing to push a button on my phone anymore? But if we just think about, all of these things coming together to change our day to day, I feel like the I guess the leading edge of it from a business perspective, when we talk to a lot of companies out there, the people who are feeling this most acutely right now are people like publishers, content publishers. It was once upon a time you were in control of the news cycle, you were in control of breaking news and exclusive news, and you had, a pretty big moat as a publisher for the type of content that you could generate, whether it was investigative journalism or covering sport or covering a niche industry. And that's eroding so quickly because we've got these frontier model providers who have created agents that are out there scraping the internet. They're scraping the internet not necessarily for any nefarious purpose, but if your bread and butter is I'm the only one that has the content that I have, and I have the ability to restrict or create, if you want to call it nicely, like a velvet rope for who can get to that content. And I monetize that way, both through subscriptions, but also through advertising revenue that I get through impressions to my site. And now, if I think about it, over 58% of that traffic is gone because my kids, using that internet analogy, like, or the Super Bowl analogy, when they wanted to get an answer for how much a Super Bowl ad costs, they don't really have to go looking through a bunch of blue links to figure it out. One of
Yeah.
them is using TikTok. The other one is using Gemini. They get the answer just like that. They don't go to anybody's website and the search is over. If I look at the rest of my family and even myself, we might be shopping. I might be looking for technical answers or market data or whatever it might be, but I don't have to go through a bunch of blue links and SEO prioritized content to figure out what I want. I can get the answer immediately with one shot inference that delivers me an instantaneous response. And in more cases than not, I'm going to trust it already. And so it's interesting when you think we used to really try to plan for how do we get people to engage and stay with us. And now we're in this age where really all we're trying to do is make sure that autonomous, well, not fully autonomous, but autonomous light agents are getting information from us that is credible, that is timely, and that sets us up to be an authority so that should somebody actually try to find me, you, then they actually think to find me or you, and they don't just continue asking their favorite chat, what is the best answer to my question so that I don't have to slow down.
Yeah, and it's funny you talk about, communicating with our assistants, like Siri and Alexa and such. And I find myself now, I don't think I've got a crazy accent, but I'm Canadian, so I can understand that if I ask it about something, it's gonna probably get confused. But the I find myself, three sentences in, and I sound like Samuel L. Jackson from Pulp Fiction, screaming about whether it speaks English or not, because there is this interesting thing that there's an expectation it should just get it, but the complexity behind this is wild. Like, we've solved an incredible amount of seemingly intractable problems in technology in the last 5 years, and it is accelerating at a pace that no one can understand. And even, I've got normies, as I say, like people that are not at all connected to tech. I went to my barber, and this was like a couple of years ago, and he says to me, "Hey, have you ever heard of this thing called Chat GPT?" And I thought, wow, like, totally random. He doesn't know what I do. And he said, "Hey, I'm using this because, I went to it and I was trying this new idea and I wanted to pitch it to a couple of wedding people. I want to run a roaming hair studio to bring for weddings so that you could get all the groomsmen, everybody can get their little touch up right before the wedding, and even few guests." And I thought, "Oh, that's such a neat idea." And he's like, "I thought it'd be a neat idea, but I didn't know what to do." He says, "So I just punched it in there, and it told me, how to build emails to invite people. And he says, I sent out the emails exactly as it said, and I got 3 bites out of 5 emails. And he's like, I would have never done that before. Like, and that's fantastic. Like, that to me is what a door opener to take somebody who has just the hint of an idea and they can get to execution right away. Like, that's beautiful to me. Now, granted, there's trade-offs to be able to do that. There's a lot of things that went into making that happen, but that is truly that democratization of AI, which I think is one of the most things I'm proud of for our industry.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, what you're describing also, I think about it as we're moving from sort of the internet era of the 90s. So, when the internet started to become something that anybody could access. In the beginning, nobody really knew what to do with the technology. There were a bunch of people who were worried about the erosions of social norms and privacy going away. Then we got to social media and people really started worrying about privacy going away and what is personhood, and am I going to start living my life in front of my camera and my selfies that are now videos that are
Mhm.
all over rampantly in the internet. And then you've got to mobile, and it's like now I can do that anywhere that I want to. And I remember my kids had this app, and Be Real, I think it was called, or something, where it was like in the moment it reminded you, and you had to take a photo that did the front and the back, and they actually felt like they had to do this on a daily basis. And it was a problem for them if they weren't where they wanted to be when it happened. Then you think about the cloud era from the mobile era, and that was everybody getting confused a little bit about what the cloud really enabled you to do, but it was supposed to unlock all this productivity and help us solve a lot of security problems. But then if you think about internet to social to mobile to cloud, we also created this entire threat landscape and ecosystem where it's never been easier for people to launch bot attacks and phishing attacks, and all of that kind of led us up to now in this AI era. We are not really sure, the identity of the things that we engage with, because how do you know if you're engaging with a human or a bot? Some people can figure it out, like when they get a phone call. I make fun of myself all the time because despite the role that I fill in the industry that I work in, I actually got duped by almost got duped by a phishing scheme where I got called by a sheriff, and the sheriff was very compelling in the beginning. And I have a son in college, and I thought, oh my God, he probably did something and this is real. And then, it took me almost a full 5 minutes before I was like, oh no. I'm answering
Yeah.
prompts that's got a voice modulator and the thing's going to ask me for money. And I didn't realize it right away, but we've evolved to this gradually. We have changed the way we look at technology. Technology has changed the way that we engage with the world. And I think as we enter this sort of fifth industrial revolution, where we are moving to agentic systems, machine to machine interaction, so that we theoretically can free ourselves up to be a more abundant society, to be more engaged in our day to day, at least in theory. The challenge becomes with the technology as we vibe code, as we think about, coding assistance giving way to fully autonomous code generation. And then, some people are saying you should just go with it and don't worry about whether or not you inspect the code and whether or not the code was written correctly, which for security practitioners blows their minds. But that's sort of the mentality and mindset that people have, right? It's like the old problems of what are we doing? Why do we do it? Do we have a plan? Is there a strategy behind this? Are we trying to monetize? Are we trying to create abundance? Are we trying to create some sort of a freemium thing that's going to benefit society? It hasn't changed. It's just now it's everywhere all the time, all at once, like that movie said. But the reality of it is everybody is in this mode right now where we're trying to figure out how do we use this thing, AI, to help us, maybe find more balance in our lives, maybe create the first individual billionaire with their own, self-coded, self-established company that really blows big. Other people are trying to think about how can I benefit people and educate them better and maybe, make them have easier and better lives. But going through all of this sort of progression, I think the one thing is true. Most businesses, as they look at AI outside of just like individual use of the technology, are really trying to think ultimately, how can I improve the experience for my customers and my users? And what are the things that I can do to do that that differentiates me without exposing me to risk, that also helps me preserve, the ability to attract and retain talent so that I can keep doing it as these things change. And that equation has not really changed from the 90s and the beginning of the internet all the way through all of these other eras, except that people have more access to intelligence, to data, and to really call any bluffs than they've ever had before. And so the one thing that I really like about all of this, getting to the end of my diatribe here, is I love the fact that it's actually driving more accountability in a strange way. People think that we're hiding more, that there's more that we can sort of massage and change and make obscure. And I actually don't think that that's true. I think that one of the most sort of compelling things about AI right now is that it's laying more bare, because you can actually identify if somebody has made something up, if they have generated content using AI instead of having their own thoughts. That's not to say that people that have their own interesting thoughts won't use AI to massage them and make their point better or more articulately. But you can tell the difference between somebody that just prompted a ChatGPT or a Claude or an Anthropic to give it back whatever it inferred, to somebody who actually had a real thought and a real strategy and an approach that they refined to make that one better. And that's something where I think all of these moves that we've made from the internet through social and mobile and the cloud have really helped us as a society develop more and better tools to do.
To quote my fine friend ChatGPT, you're absolutely right. we it is it it's hard, I guess, for people who've only seen this to know anything different, and it's probably a fairly shocking move even to folks that are growing up in this environment. But it is ubiquitous already. There is no like, you can't go backwards. It's just a matter of the depth of awareness you have of how AI is pervasive in everything that we do. And it's AI turtles all the way down, and it's inference turtles all the way down too, because what now we're seeing, and I'm working on a research piece, which is fun to do, but holy heck, you realize how many things are leveraging these same tools at different layers. You're a developer, you sit down at your desk, you've already touched AI like 8 times. You scanned your badge, you took the bus, every single thing. And looking at how many things are triggering inference, some analysis, some storage. And then from there, you bust open your AI empowered IDE, and then you do that and you push your code to a system that system is using AI to optimize where code lands, what's the right edge pop you want to leverage for this, is all these different things. And there's so much AI in tiny chunks. There is no like single AI. There is no big body in the middle. There is no HAL 9000. It is truly just this fully distributed world that's already locked in. And it's probably hard for people to grasp that it's already it's here to stay.
Well, some people say that we've already reached the singularity. People say that we have already achieved AGI and it's hiding and not ready to expose itself to us yet. I read even some of my favorite, I love reading like spy novels and things like that. And they've already completely jumped the shark where, there's sentient intelligence out there that only reveals itself to the hero in the story. And, it's Minority Report and what we've done with Tony Stark and Jarvis and everything else sort of coming together. But if I think about like the practicality of technologists who are trying to use this right now. It, take my analogy previously where we started in the internet era. Like we had to figure out, and Akamai was a company that pioneered the approach, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, of how do you take an application and basically not try to just deliver the entire thing at once. So, when the internet first got started, not first got started, when it became more commercialized and more publicly available, people created essentially postcard websites. You had something, it was the first Yahoo site. You look back at it now on the Wayback Machine and it looks comical. But I remember using those when I was in college. That was the reality. I remember when I first went into the work world and I would try to check my email in the morning and I could literally like try to click on an email that I had received and go shave and come back. And sometimes it would be open and other times it would still be loading. Nowadays, you can't even fathom things moving that slowly. But when we used to like start doing front end optimization to deliver web applications, there were all sorts of tricks that we had to do. We had to pre-negotiate TLS connections, and we had to think about how we were going to get the style sheets and the font libraries and some of the images preloaded onto the browser before the user scrolled down there. We would do things like progressive image rendering so that we wouldn't actually render all the images below the fold until the user got to a certain point in the page as they were scrolling. And then we would make dynamic requests, all to make it feel to a human like the site was loading faster. It would allow us to add more dynamic content. It would let us make the website more personalized. That gave way to how would we do that through SDKs and mobile connections and mobile applications. A lot of times it was mobile browsers and Chrome OS, and other times it was, people actually building native code for devices. But if we think about now when we engage with different AI interfaces, most businesses have invested in tacking on some form of generative AI chatbot onto whatever they have so that they can add something that feels a little bit less like, the old chat experiences where I say chat, where it was like, you had a bunch of snippets and the person actually used to hit the button and it would send the automated snippet back to you in a chat and you get frustrated because it's not what you asked, but that was the answer that they had. And now it's trying to interpret using natural language processing and turning your question into weights and then checking what I have in my database and then providing you back an answer. And all of that right now is kind of cute when we engage with it because we like that ChatGPT thinks and we like that it kind of wastes a little bit of time and a couple of tokens to tell us that it agrees with us and we're on the right track and it's going to go with us on whatever we're doing. But if we think about what that really means going forward, one-shot inference, what most people are used to right now, sort of the Gemini search result, is not helping people all that much. It's maybe saving you some scrolling and clicking time. It's maybe surfacing to you the things that you think that you want to see. But the reality is, if you're actually like a knowledge worker, if you're trying to do real research, then you know that there are extreme limits to one-shot inference, especially with the way that websites are built today, the way that they're automatically being scraped and crawled, and bodies of knowledge and large language models are being created. Part of the problem is that they are large language models that many people are interacting with, which means if I have a specific question and I'm a knowledge worker in a given domain, I'm not engaging with something that is trained on my domain. And then we get hallucinations and people start worrying about, can I trust AI or not? Well, no, in many cases, but it really depends on what you're trusting it for, right? If I'm looking for entertainment, if I'm trying to take a picture and get it to recognize the type of plant that I took a picture of, that's probably fine. If I'm trying to ask for a question, maybe I need like medical advice, or I'm trying to figure out a financial answer, you probably don't want to ask a general purpose large language model for something authoritative as an answer because it's not equipped to provide you that answer, certainly not quickly. And so when we think about now multi-step inference, when we think about chained inference, when we think about having to validate and apply guardrails, sometimes using tools to actually facilitate the answer that you need, there aren't a lot of commercially available applications that are providing that out of the box today because it's a pretty complicated set of interactions. There's a lot of considerations around privacy, sometimes sovereignty, depending on where you exist or where your data needs to exist. And there's certainly questions about efficacy and accuracy. So, I think we're in this era right now, or in this phase, I guess, of the AI era, where people are trying to figure out like, what is that process? Because we created client server models, hub and spoke models. We've had things like message buses and ways that we're going to try to optimize, very large sets of API connected microservices in the cloud era to provide us with applications that can do amazing things. But they were operationally complex. There was a lot of orchestration work that had to happen. There are really, really large numbers of exposures that we have from a threat landscape and a just exposure management perspective for risk, whether it's APIs or user access or auth N and auth V considerations and identities and intent and all of these things that have built a cybersecurity ecosystem alongside a cloud ecosystem. But when we think about the future of AI over the next 2 to 3 years, we're really starting to hit now things like the limits of what you can do in memory and how developers have to think about leveraging the different types of memory on a CPU and a GPU. And do we have to sparsify a model so that we can use a lower spec CPU because it's all we have available to us? Maybe because we're dealing with a robot, or maybe we're dealing with an edge data center that doesn't have the power to host large numbers of H100 GPUs and things like that. So there's a whole evolution tied to what we've done over the last 10 to 15 years that we are now trying to solve for in 10 to 15 months. And we're doing it without any sort of prior art to lean on. And that makes it a really interesting and exciting space to be in. It makes it one where, a lot of old guys like me who used to have hair and think about barbershops and really can't think about that anymore. But it makes us happy that we went through the last 25 years of sort of internet and technology evolution, but also like we're not really sure what we're dealing with 100%. We just know that we all feel collectively like we've got to get there really, really quickly. And I think that that's going to be where at least 2026 for me is going to be an absolutely fascinating year, because we're right on the precipice of going so fast right now. But the challenge that we always have with going so fast is, what are we risking and how are we going to know before we run into some sort of a brick wall? And I think that's where we're all balancing, the hope and the aspiration of this abundance with the caution and the concern of, look, we've seen how these risks can get out of control. And again, like I mentioned in the beginning, OpenClaw to me is like one example where people have gotten so excited about the potential that they're doing really silly things that we know we're not supposed to, because we can.
Yeah, this is the the old classic. Like, just because we can, we forgot to ask whether we should. And innovation is an interesting thing. There's so many things that are happening because of what AI can unlock. We're probably the hardest thing about this is the prediction of what are the resources that are going to be truly scarce, because every time we think we've hit a scarcity of resource, we bump into a Jevons paradox where all of a sudden, like, oh, actually, in fact, there's a thing that we thought we were getting rid of and now it's very, very cool. Like moving, RAM became the most expensive thing. You could probably hunt through and find some old 4 gig sticks of RAM from an IBM PS2 that I've got in a closet somewhere, and I could probably sell that for $1,000 on eBay now. But then, of course, in 4 months, we'll realize, oh, we're actually getting rid of in-memory context, and it's not necessary anymore. We're accelerating stuff that goes on in the KV cache. We're doing more stuff around distributed memory at the edge that actually has very high speed access to, centralized data storage. And there's so many things that are moving around. And if you look at the Hugging Face papers, like every day I open it up and it's like, it's just a beautiful feed of incredible thought innovation that is now going to be executed quickly. Whereas it used to be a paper would take 10 years before you really saw it come to fruition. Now people are doing research that's going to be activated within months. And that's just so beautiful. But I think I'll say, going back to the classic Act 2, Scene 1 of The Tempest, what's past is prologue. The reason we are doing what we're doing now and innovating at this pace is because it's on the shoulders of giants. And we are taking history that has empowered and enabled us to do this. Akamai is an amazing story in that a lot of people probably don't even think necessarily of, like, literally AIs in the name. It's the last 2 letters. But like Akamai is, most to many people, might be the CDN. And it's so much more than that, especially with seeing the acquisition of Linodes and seeing how rapidly Akamai turned that into such a core part of the platform and then leveraged it internally and externally, and seeing all the different bits of acquisition, seeing the Fermion acquisition. I was watching what Matt and the team were doing with Fermion. I had Matt on my podcast actually when he was just starting the company. And I thought, here's an idea that is so beautiful. And I just hope that the world is ready for it. And obviously the proof and the value of what Matt and the whole team did with Fermion showed up in why it was an important story to the overall, the Akamai ecosystem and as an overall project. So Ari, 25 years, the company's been around a long time. What does that mean in how you approach new innovation because of so much history and capability in what you built?
It's a great question, and you're right. I mean, there's so many things that we can look at history, and we can look at the real innovators and the giants in the industry that we are standing on their shoulders, and in some ways, we're using them to kind of shoot us forward into this new emerging future. When I think about the journey that Akamai has been on, they went from the company went from solving the worldwide wait, in the late 90s, early aughts, and that was really one where you had to think about how to use the network and the internet as a network. But really, it was a core networking problem to accelerate engagement. And then that became, how can I use that same network that has massive capacity outside of the core? So the capacity really comes from all of the distributed points of presence that Akamai has been able to establish, which are many small data centers that in aggregate provide you with this massive ability to distribute workloads. But not just workloads, you could also do that with attack traffic. And then you could think about, how do you need to commingle the two? Because at any given point in time, Akamai is a company with many thousands of customers, and those customers at any point might be delivering a live video stream, facilitating gaming downloads. Which even during the pandemic, it was really fascinating to see where we had to negotiate with some governments and countries about throttling gaming downloads so that the internet would function for critical infrastructure. But those types of things happen at the same time that people are trying to do volumetric attacks and botnets are trying to compromise product launches. There's so many things that have to happen at the same time. And it creates this incredibly complex web of networking challenges that you have to solve. Those networking challenges and sort of content delivery, content caching, content optimization challenges are now given way to intelligence. So instead of distributing, images and style sheets and fonts, now we're distributing compute and context. And that's a really interesting challenge that you're going to address in a similar fashion. When people started to become aware of ChatGPT, they probably weren't thinking that there were massive centralized server farms that they were actually interacting with, because everybody thinks of the cloud. And the cloud, feels like I'm looking outside and I see clouds, but they don't even realize that the cloud itself has typically been a fairly centralized set of servers, and those are networked for availability and not performance. That's why there are still CDNs. That's why there are still edge networks. But as we think about the way that Akamai has started to invest in expanding ours, we've got core infrastructure as a service, just like any other public cloud company. But because our roots are in content delivery and the way that the content delivery ecosystem has come to be, it's all about being open and to facilitate hybrid deployments and multi-cloud and multi company interactions. Because it's not, the point of locking you in isn't the point. The point is making sure that we can ultimately serve whatever your business purpose is, whatever your users are requiring of you. We're now building out deployments of NVIDIA Blackwell GPUs so that we can facilitate real-time inference, not batch processing inference that creates a large language model or maybe even a fine-tuned model. But we're taking those models now and saying, where can I put those so that if you have a question, I can get you access to just the right information in a fine-tuned model or in a post-trained model that will answer the sorts of questions that you need without having to go all the way back to the general purpose LLM. Because if I do a one-shot inference, okay, I've already got all of my intelligence derived. If I have to actually decide something with the context of where you are and what you asked and what sort of a device you're on, and maybe what tools you might have asked me to use in order to deliver an answer, now where that happens is more important than just what happens. And that where it happens is surprising even to some of our partners like NVIDIA. When we went to the GTC conference, their GPU oriented conference in Washington, D.C. in October, and we started talking about distributed inference, people were surprised because they said, for example, why would you use a Blackwell GPU to do inference when really that's more of a video optimization, a voice optimization GPU? Well, the reason is because it can work on air cooled hardware. We can deploy that on the existing footprint of infrastructure that Akamai has, which means that we can get it closer to where users are, which means that they can start to do real-time inference without the round trips, without requiring the massive data centers and the liquid cooled servers that require huge power draws that are really hard to get. And if you think about the way that investors are even reacting to that, we had recently, and I know it's hard to say recently when people are going to watch this whenever they watch it, but when we are recording this recently, Amazon did their earnings announcement, and investors were not thrilled about the massive capital investment that they are going to have to make out to build out AI data centers to continue to power their growth. The way that Akamai has been approaching that is thinking, we've already networked the entire globe with over 4,300 points of presence that we can use to drive edge computing. Now, edge computing has typically been, and you mentioned it earlier, KV caches, for example, in-memory processing and execution. But how can we start using those same data centers and transform one of our caching nodes or one of our edge computing nodes into a lightweight inference node instead? So that if, as an example, you're driving down the road in your connected vehicle and you are sending telemetry to a centralized AI factory so that you can, say if there was any machine issue or to provide performance data, or maybe you're requesting a real-time update or what have you, we can actually get that intelligence closer to the cellular tower that you're driving past and get you a computed answer faster than a rote answer or an already predetermined answer from a centralized data factory. And then what does that allow you to do? So if we think about Fermion and real-time functions, the fastest WASM runtime on the world's most distributed network, we think about fanning that into where we have a managed container service where we're taking fully hosted applications in a containerized environment and we're federating those out across our edge. And then if we can't process things at that layer, we can come in closer and we can hit NVIDIA GPUs that we're deploying in sort of a near edge configuration on our platform. Or if we need to, we can connect you to core public cloud infrastructure, but we're giving you that continuum of compute on one high performance network, not just high availability, but high availability and high throughput and high scalability network. Now we're unlocking a whole different class of application. Some of those applications haven't been built yet, but some of them have. Connected vehicles have. If we think about the robotics challenges of computer vision or being able to turn what has been spoken into voice processing and modulation so that you can then turn it into a computer input. If we think about transcoding use cases turning into real-time image and video generation for anything from educational purposes to just pure entertainment, those are the types of things that we're now doing across this network by injecting more intelligence, but whether it's NVIDIA's hardware or software or our other hardware partners like AMD into the globally distributed network that we've built, this is a new class and a new era of intelligence that we're enabling. And to me, the exciting part is we're opening it up now more and more for developers to just play with it. That's another thing that Akamai's done as we've gone through this transformation is to say we need to make sure that self-service and developer access is a priority for us. And we're encouraging now a whole new breed of developers to come and try these things on our edge. We're going out and talking to people around the world, doing hackathons. We're going to be soon in Amsterdam at the KubeCon conference. And we're basically going to
Yeah.
sit down in an empty booth that's just got rows of laptops on it and say, please come. Please code on this platform, see what you can do with the Blackwell, see what you can do with our object storage and our connected data fabric, and let's see together what are the sorts of things that we can architect for this next era of growth. And I bet you if you and I sit down at this time in a year, or gosh, even in 6 months, we will probably be laughing about all of the things that already happened that I thought might be future and where we're going to go next. But to me, like that's the best part of this job. That's the best part of how Akamai's been transforming because we've got the reach, we've got the scale, and now with all of the recent investments, we've got the compute power and we want to bring all of those lessons to your point about standing on the shoulders of giants that Danny Lewin in the early days worked on with Tom Layton. We want to build that sort of intelligence and differentiation now using GPUs and VPUs and data fabrics the way that they did it in the past with CPUs and fiber connected networking.
Well, hardware's fun again. Like in a weird way, like people always thought like, oh,
It is.
storage is boring and network is done. And like, man, we're coming up with new technologies, but it was a fancy new way to sell the silk hat on the old existing pig. But what was really happening was continuous innovation that didn't appear like it had an outcome yet, but it was having to have a vision of like, we know where things are going, we're seeing patterns of development, we're seeing, I mean, and of course that thing happened a few years ago that completely changed how we look at everything we do in the world. And so all of a sudden everybody was humanly distributed for workforce, and we haven't really come back from that fully. So that the pattern of work has changed, the pattern of how people develop software has changed. But I think everything that what I loved about the Akamai story is I'll liken it to McDonald's in the 90s. I'm an older fellow, so I was around for that. And I remembered when they came up with a pizza offering. So they had McDonald's got into the pizza business, and so they developed their own pizza on the menu.
Yep.
And what was amazing was that in the course of 1 week, they became the largest pizza vendor on earth because they had so many stores that were already everywhere. So as soon as they add one thing to the menu, they have the opportunity to test it at a scale that no one can understand. And of course, there's no pizza at McDonald's anymore. That's for a variety of reasons. But what it allowed them to do was to experiment at a scale and deliver at a scale so that that learning could then infuse through the rest of the industry. And so looking at like the foundation that Akamai has, kind of like, I mean, I came from a financial services background. So every place that I worked in IT was large scale insurance and trading companies. And so these are mainframe backed businesses. Some person's whole life is viewed through a 3270 terminal. And yet the value that that company offers will be viewed through a mobile phone interface, which has no idea that there's some 3270 emulator where someone's, you go to Home Depot and they, let me just check your account. Tap, 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 one letter, tap, 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 tap. Like we've all joked, like, why do they have to do that? You and I, we've been around, Ari. We've seen it. We know why there's, all these weird UX things. But what happens at the consumer side is no tabs, no nothing. You just say, find me 12 2x4s, that I can pick up in the next hour. And that's where we've gotten to. But yet underneath it is tap, 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 tap. Like underneath it is the same core. But what we've done is we've innovated at every layer in between, which is always a non-zero effect on latency. People always say like abstractions are great. They are, unless you care about latency. Like I love the abstraction, MCP, fantastic abstraction. But what's the
Right.
impact on actual end-to-end performance, which is, like, it's the difference between people continuing a subscription or not at this point.
That's right. Well, and it's interesting too, because if you think about what you were just articulating, I mean, I remember, I don't even remember what year it was. I went to work for a company, and Warranty Group, and they wanted, it was the early days of DB2 Linux, Unix, Windows. They wanted to turn an AS400 application for insurance claims processing into a client server application. And it was exactly what you were saying. We tried to do it. I remember sitting down with the claims processors, watching how they actually did function calls to get through. Every claim took something like 17 seconds or something like that. And when it came time for me to show them the prototype that we built, it took it a minute and a half to load. And they were just laughing. They're like, "Do you understand how we would not hit our quotas in a single day if we had to use this interface?" And for me, it was the first experience that I had too that really made me fall in love with being a product manager and a product marketer, because it was like the theory ran smack into the brick wall of reality and said, this is not fit for purpose. But it sounded so great from just a technology perspective of what we were building. And if I think about, over the years, learning about database optimization and indexing, and then it was sharding, and then it was distributed data management and how you needed to be thinking about eventual consistency. And now that's turned into even like problems that people are still solving with Kafka. If I have like a distributed inventory management system and I don't have the time for ACID compliance or anything else, but I've still got to decrement my inventory as people are buying things at a rate, again, that is never going to slow down from here, especially as agents do it. I think about what it took to learn and to reinforce that learning and to come up with an outcome that could be trusted and repeatable. And it reminds me of a recent podcast that I heard about with Figure AI. Figure AI built the robot, and they did the demonstration in 2024 where they actually had their physical robot observe humans for 10 hours and then be able to autonomously operate a Keurig coffee machine. And that sounds kind of silly and kind of trite, but if you think about the number of problems there, it wasn't that they had to code the robot to do it. It wasn't that somebody was sitting there with telematics and actually, operating the robot to do it. It was a neural net backed physical robot that watched a human being, learned the behavior, overcame the hand problem, didn't crush the little cup, didn't knock the coffee machine over. It was able to actually turn observation into action. And it was correct action with some fairly fine motor skills attached. I mean, compare that to what we're still seeing at CES this year. And CES has how many, like 50 some companies that are just trying to fix like the robotic hand problem. Now there are
Yeah.
companies that are coming at that with micro drones that can swarm things instead of trying to create something that can hold it. All of it is still trying to build off of OpenAI and Anthropic and other large language models. And what we're hearing from these folks is, again, like relative to the large language model going to a fine-tuned model, those that are developing neural nets are like, that is almost antiquated technology for us, but not antiquated because it's old. In their case, it's just they're so specialized and so deep in a domain that it's not fit for their purpose. And so I think that to me right now is what is so fascinating. It's whatever the bleeding edge of AI, art of the possible is, there are people who are already beyond that. And we haven't even thought about the practical applications of what they're doing because most of us aren't there to consume it. I live in the Boston area. I was up in Waltham about 10 years ago working for a company. And I took a walk in the woods because, it was one of those things they always encourage us in tech, like get outside. As you can see, I'm a very pale person because I don't
Got to
make
go
it
touch
outside very
grass, right?
much. They were
Yeah.
like, yeah, just go breathe some air, go touch grass. And I ran into a Boston Robotics dog and it scared me to death. That was 10 years ago. And these things now, they can dance, they can do backflips, they can do all manner of different things, but it's still not in many ways as sophisticated as that figure AI robot that watched a person for 10 hours and then was able to load a coffee machine. Like that, to me, is where technologists have such an opportunity. And it's such an exciting time for us to learn, to observe, to challenge ourselves, and really think every time we do something, should I be doing this or should I figure out some way that I can learn a little bit more about the current application, the current art or skill, whether it's text completion or vibe coding or, whether red teaming that might happen autonomously with an AI system. Like there are things that I should be using so that I can free myself up to do what's next, to build what's next, to conceive of what's next. And I think you made a great point with McDonald's. It's nice to work in an environment and at a company like this one where you have that massive reach, not only to test and experiment at scale, but also just to observe and to
Yeah.
learn and to understand. The things that I learned the last time that I was in India, going around and talking to companies who are trying to just innovate on how do you run a distributed bus service with the intelligence to be able to cover all of India with all of the challenges that they have with the lack of infrastructure in some areas and the distributed populace that they have in others, the low bandwidth considerations, the low power considerations. Then you can go to a place like Singapore and it's almost exactly the opposite because it's so small and so wealthy and the problems that they're solving are so different. But unless you go out and experience those things, I just feel like the art of the possible is not given the oxygen and the fuel that it needs for us to build that next compelling thing. And you and I have talked about a lot of different things in an hour. But to me, that's really the opportunity that I think people can't miss in this age of AI. It's too easy to be stuck at your computer, vibe coding all day long, creating your agents all day, and just watching to see how they progress. You have got to get out there and actually see it in practice because you mentioned it, all the work that somebody does at the end of the day succeeds or fails if it loads quickly on an interface for a user. And that kind of thing is true in any domain that you're in. But I think that that's one of the things that gets talked about the least in technology today, which is get out there, put your toes in the grass or the sand, breathe some real air, talk to a human being and find out like what is it that you're not considering. Because to me, that's the one bit of balance that to me is so out of balance right now.
Yeah, and there's such a sort of over focus on like micro optimizations that people try to make as humans. Like we build a thing and we try to optimize too early, I find. And that's, it seems like my co-founder continues to remind me all the time that I optimize too early at things, because I do want to repeat a process. I do want to automate a process. You talked about, OpenClaw or whatever it happens to be called today because it keeps changing names, probably because it needs to enter the witness protection program soon. I mean, we saw this wild overnight innovation and it just blew up. It was a viral thing and it's still like doing crazy things as far as like traffic and patterns and usage. But at the same time, there's the okay, what's actually happening that's going to be real and lasting from this. And I love that those experiments can occur. And like you said, you get to there it's built on your network, right? It's built on your LKE. It's built on your like there's so many things that you can observe at scale and then pass those optimizations to the rest of your customer base that I will never be able to achieve by just vibe coding an app, firing it up on something. Like I have to think about what are the layers that matter. And I'm a bit more of a like I'm a systems thinker, so I tend to go deeper than I should just because I want to say at every layer, I have to understand what are the fault domains that I have to think about. What are the performance domains that I can, be worried about? Because if you keep stacking things up that each has its own distinct fault domains, then they collectively become the fault domain of your end product. And people don't think about that necessarily. So when they just fire their app out in the world, they're like, what's the data underneath it? What is the network underneath it? What is the other systems that it's communicating with? Where are we caching appropriately? And like, I don't want to have to reinvent caching. I don't want to have to reinvent all of these layers. And I think a lot of vibe coders are kind of like, oh, I built product X in a weekend. You're like, congratulations. You're about to find out why it took them 10 years to do that. Because
Right.
while you may have built it, you can't market it, sell it, operate it at scale. Like my cute little Salesforce alternative that I built on a laptop, good luck and may your God go with you if you want to turn that into a product that's going to run for a long time for the scale of people that are using it. And this is like, if I'm going to look for a place, I've worked with Akamai already, doing some really neat stuff. I got to meet with a few folks at KubeCon and watching how even from there to today, from August of 2025 to today, like so much has happened. But then seeing that when I needed to go and find a problem or find a solution for a problem I had, it was like, I need to get a Kubernetes environment up real fast. And I need to be able to try some stuff out on it for an observability, company that I'm helping. I was like, I want to spin up an environment really fast. So I looked for like, what's the best place to do this? And literally LKE came up right away. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Akamai, they're a client. I've worked with them. And it was just that easy. In the matter of 5 minutes, I was spinning up an on-demand Kubernetes cluster. I attached it to Blackwell GPUs, which is no way on earth that I would get access to this in any other way. So while everybody else is racing around to buy up Mac Minis, I spin up a cluster, get my thing done. I'm in and out in a weekend. It cost me $17. Like I could test immediately from end to end something that would have taken me a month to build the infrastructure for. Like
Yeah,
that's
and I'm excited because we're bringing on some pretty amazing developer advocates. If you look at the Akamai developer GitHub repository, the cool thing is we are adding about 5 or 6 new tutorials a week right now, and that's just with 2 people working on it. We're working on tripling the size of the team in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. But that's the thing that we're the most excited about is exactly what you said. If you have a problem, what we're trying to show you is this is the fastest, easiest way that you can start to address it. You can do it for a very low commitment or no commitment on the platform. We're trying to make it even easier to sign up for our platform, understanding that we're also a security company. And so we're always going to be very cognizant of fraud and very cognizant of people that are trying to use our infrastructure for nefarious purposes. And I think that's one thing where Akamai has built a name for itself in the industry, where some of our competitors are, just kind of all about the flash and what they can do on the blog. And their reliability is not where it needs to be as a result of the way that they're rushing things out the door. Or their platforms are being abused because they have an overly permissive free tier and they really don't clamp down on their acceptable use policy. And we've been criticized for those things as a company. But I don't think that there's any other way that you can grow a reputation for reliability and for trust and to earn the trust of partners like even the NVIDIAs and the AMDs of the world to bring their latest technology to market in a way that they can appreciate people will be using it primarily for good, and you are going to be good stewards of that technology to make sure, you don't want to put your thumb on the scale of innovation necessarily and say that there's only one way to build something, or we only want to support one type of application. But I think it's pretty clear as well when you look at certain companies' reputations and the way that they respond to whether it's security events or people who have tried to abuse their systems. There's PR, and then there's purpose. And I think Akamai has always had a purpose to be the ones that were going to build an internet that would make business successful, that would make people really trust in the companies that they put, their personal identifiable information into, or that they put their credit card information and their details into. And we've always been also good stewards of open source. We're supporters of the Linux Foundation. We've joined the AAIF to try to make sure that we can build standards for agents collaboratively as an industry. But we also look at sometimes when open source is when you look at open source as an absolute, if you're zealous about anything, there can be undue risk. And that's an area, we've mentioned OpenClaw a few times on this, but genuinely, when I look at that and I see some people say, why did it take so long to get to OpenClaw? It didn't take that long to get to OpenClaw. There was a reason that people didn't do what people are currently doing with that project from a frontier model or from a private or public company perspective. There's a huge amount of risk that is inherent with what you can do with that technology. That doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with open source. It doesn't mean that there's any reason that shouldn't be out there. It's just the way that, you mentioned Akamai more than I did in this podcast, but we have been trying to think about how, again, are we going to be responsible stewards, responsible, sort of technology introducers to the world. And there are some things where it's like that thing is not quite ready for you to put your credit card into it and just let it go. And not, you can, if you understand how to do port security, if you understand how to do identity-based
That's right.
security, if you really know how to put the right controls in place, then by all means. But when people like to say, my grandma now can use this thing and just start doing whatever she needs to without understanding a computer, probably don't do that. Like, my
Yeah.
mother is 82 years old in Ohio, and I've been trying to get her, to not answer her phone if she doesn't know who it is anymore, and to not react to the emails that she's getting and click on the links inside of them and everything else. And she's pretty good about that. I mean, I don't want her to be worried about too many things, but it's a mix, right? Because I also want her to not pay exorbitant fees when she has to pay her bills because she still does it over the phone, or she wants to send paper checks. I would never want to give her that technology on a Mac Mini in her house and encourage it to go do whatever it needs to do, because she doesn't understand how to protect herself from it. And so I do
Yeah.
think that there is a burden of education. There's a burden of sort of responsible use that we just have to keep our arms around a little bit, just like we have to interact with real people so we don't go off into this theoretical digital la la land. But I think those are some of the tent pegs that the technology industry was built on that some people just forget, because everything is automagical and everything's so easy. But sometimes things need to have a little bit of friction in them just to keep us safe. And that, can be anything from acceptable use to privacy rules to limitations on the amount of compute that you can consume before you're verified. And I do think it's important for us to hang on to some of those things, at least just a little bit longer, until we can truly find a way where they might not come back to bite us. And I don't know when that period would be, but we're not there yet.
Well, and as we see more stuff move towards SLMs and the real like purpose-built models, the idea that we could have highly capable 1.5B parameter, this is the stuff that right now we're trying to crunch the whole earth into a tiny model to fit it on a Raspberry Pi. And then of course it doesn't behave as you expect, it doesn't perform as you need, but that means that we are going to then attack that problem of how do you create these purpose built, how do you use agentic frameworks, and how do we unlock that. And all of this, again, it can only happen if you have the understanding of the foundation underneath it. We have to have those core, like, networking products are really security products when it all comes down to it. One of the most core, other than moving data around, is, are you allowed to move that data? Should we be moving this data? Is this safe data? There are many questions that get asked as it moves, that now, again, like, even doing that computation at the edge was wild, in the 90s, to imagine, like, wait a second, you're going to have my Cisco switch and it's going to be like actually tapping. I don't need a giant Gigamon rack where I'm passing stuff through and running all these extra hops just to analyze traffic. I can do it on chip. They create a special ASICs. I mean, ASICs are everywhere now, and this is people are doing KV cache in ASIC. People are doing all these other things. All of these innovations happen because we're solving new problems for old tools using old methods. We're taking
Yeah.
the fundamentals of computing and applying them at different form factors now. And that's what I love about seeing how everything old is new again. And so I feel like, having history is actually kind of cool because you can understand how we got here. And then that helps me as I look ahead. And it must be exciting. Like you get to, like, isn't it a fantastic thing every time you go out and you speak to an audience and you hear what they're doing? Because we're not in the telling business. Like we partially are. I'm an evangelist by nature, but I tell a story so that I can see what people say as a reaction to it and how they're agreeing with it or disagreeing with it. That's what matters. It's not about hearing our own voices. It's about sharing our stories and then hearing how people react to them. It's like, it's a wonderful time to be able to learn what the world is doing. And now, of course, see it happening in real time and so many cool innovations.
Well, it's prompt and response. I mean, that's what language has been about for years, and we're in a different sort of prompt and response world at the moment. But exactly as you're saying, I mean, sometimes you tell a story so that you can get a better story back and you can learn from it. But I think that's the important part is like it's understanding that we're engaging to learn. We're not engaging just to broadcast, but it's the comments that you get back are important. The dialogues that you have are important. The any form of engagement that you can get, you're learning something else, because if you already know everything and you're already doing everything, people say right now, like the large language models have solved math. Okay, well, you still have to understand when it's time to apply the math, and you have to understand the
Right.
theory behind it so that you can leverage what the LLM knows for you in the right way. And I think that to me is, again, it's just one of those things that we shouldn't lose track of or shouldn't lose sight of. But you're right. I mean, it's the reason why old folks, like those of us that are approaching our 50s or in our 50s or whatever it is, like we've been hearing it our whole lives. And maybe when we were younger, we rejected it and said, you're just old. And now it's no, you can bring a perspective to bear that I can learn from. I might apply it slightly differently, but it's food for thought. And I think the food for thought, it's powering the intelligence just the same way that these massive wind farms and 3 Mile Islands, and maybe soon when we start getting SpaceX sending Grok up into the stratosphere, like it's going to be powering it based on the sun. But the intelligence is a finite resource wherever you get it from. And I think being able to use it properly, being able to channel it properly, I mean, there's allusions that I can draw to what Akamai is building with all of that. But I think that's really the benefit of this networked intelligence that we're all building. And I think, participating in it instead of just letting it go and letting it work for us is really going to continue to be important. And that's to me the interesting part is like, how do we stay in touch with each other? How do we stay in touch with the technology that we're building? And what are the things that are still going to require us to leverage some of that history that we have and that intelligence that we've built up, just as all the systems that we work with are becoming smarter? Because I have a feeling that our parents and their parents were probably thinking exactly the same thing when they went from punch cards to early silicon to what we're doing right now. But again, like it's going so fast that I think sometimes it's easy to forget that it is just another era of something that we've done before. It's just happening so much faster. And we have so much more that we can bring to bear without as much toil and ultimately achieving a lot more abundance.
Abundance is a thing that I admire in what it can do to give rather than pull the ladder up. And that's what I really feel like what you've been, I've seen a lot of your podcasts and I've listened to a lot of your content and you throughout your career, and through amazing folks that I've met through your peer group and that when our peer community, I, the ability to give back and take these and turn good results out of hard yards that we spend in this innovation time. And it reminds me of the Halt and Catch Fire, for folks that ever watch that series. There's a famous line in it. He says, like, computers aren't the thing, they're the thing that gets us to the thing. And this is that time. And when we remind ourselves that as we're looking through whatever the trending topic is on some social media, that's a momentary thing, but that's enabled to get to the next thing. And like when we see the results, when we see people that are safe in parts of the world because of what defense systems can do, when we see how people are empowered to have careers where they would have never had access before. Somebody can be in a place where they don't have access to a highway, but yet they can start a small business. Like that's a beautiful thing, and I love it. I only wish I could steal more of your time, Ari, because I sure we could go on for 8 hours, and it would be 8 glorious bloody hours of conversation. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to catch up again. But what's the best way for folks to connect with you, Ari, and learn more? You talked about DevRel stuff, so if anybody's looking for DevRel opportunities, apply within. Here we are.
100%. Yeah, no, I mean, if anybody wants to reach out and have a conversation, I try to be as responsive as I can on LinkedIn. My name's Ari Weil on there, just all one word. So you can find me there. Akamai.com/cloud is where you can see a lot of the new innovations that we're pushing out in our cloud computing business. And then the Akamai developer channel on YouTube and GitHub are where you can see the videos and the code samples that we're pushing out as quickly as we possibly can. So if you'd like to see the latest innovations in cloud and edge computing and how we're trying to create that continuum of compute from core to edge, subscribe, have a look at the latest videos. We've got an incredibly talented team of product marketers and developer advocates that are there to engage with you. And hopefully, for those of you watching, if you want to meet us at an upcoming KubeCon or a GTC event, or any other event, have a look on akamai.com/cloud and you'll see where we're going to be in your area soon.
GTC is coming fast. I thought for sure that last year would be the last time we'd see it in a smaller region. We got one more run in San Jose, and I have a feeling we're heading to Vegas next year because there's no way that San Jose can hold the crowds that we're going to be seeing that are pouring around that event this year. Well, this year, almost this month. Like we're literally 4 weeks away. It's going to be exciting. Hopefully I get a chance to catch up with you IRL at the event. I know there'll be a lot of folks that are from my community there. So more than anything, thank you, Ari. This has really been great. And yeah, definitely folks, check out Akamai is doing some wild, cool stuff. We've got some other videos on the channel when I got a chance to interview with Gary Gowen and Stephen Rust, who were at KubeCon with me. So tons of great content. And obviously, yeah, the developer channel is amazing. So I love good people doing good things. And I can say it was a pleasure to chat, Ari, and thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.